Like to call this meeting to order. Today is Tuesday, June 15th, 2021. This is a Prescott City Council study session. Let's please call roll.
Mayor Mangarelli.
Present.
Councilwoman Scholl.
Here.
Councilman Blair.
Yes.
Councilman Good.
Present.
And let the record state Councilmember Rusing and Councilman Tenney are absent. Councilman Sishka, will he be arriving late?
Yeah, I think he'll be here momentarily. Thank you, Jennifer. Welcome, everybody. Thanks for coming out today for a special study session for the Arizona Eco Development Annexation. We'll have a presentation by John Palladini, maybe others, John? Okay, just you. And then after he gives us a little update on what has happened here in the last week, then we'll go right to public comment. I think there are sheets of paper back here for folks to
Yes, that's correct.
to grab for
They are
public
back on the
comment.
table.
Okay, thank you. John?
Okay, Mayor Council. So this is an update to the development agreement. Last week, there were concerns raised about the timing of the conveyance of the 474 acres. As we know, it was tied to or is tied to the city's purchase of the what we call the W parcel, and the timing in the original document set a not later than closing for both at 120 days after the referendum period is up, which is 30 days. So in discussions with AED and their attorney, we came to a tentative agreement or potential agreement that takes away some of the concerns. And the other concern was that the purchase of the W parcel was predicated on an appraiser establishing the price. And so that was, again, it was another concern that was raised about sort of the unknown. So to resolve that, there's going to be a change to this section that deals with the purchase of the W parcel. And that is this, that the city, the city and the developer will agree on a set purchase price. The comps that we have, we don't have a formal appraisal, but the comps that we've seen in that industrial area at the airport come in around $100,000 an acre. And these are smaller parcels too, not 116 acres. So in negotiating with the developer, with AED, we agreed that because it's a larger parcel, we would discount the per acre price by 15%. So to $85,000 an acre. However, in negotiating the deal, we agreed to also acquire another 43 acres of land around the airport. This is sort of north and south of the airport for airport purposes at the same price. In other words, 116 times the 85, which comes to, see if I can scroll down here, which comes to $9.877 million. Now, that may be a little bit of a sticker shock. I think I heard somebody cough. But before we get too concerned about it, there are a couple of things that happen as part of this deal. First of all, it shortens the purchase price time or closing of escrow time to 30 days following expiration of the referendum period. So not more than essentially 60 days after the deal is approved. So and then the section regarding the 474 acres still ties the conveyance to this purchase. There's two factors though that effectively drive the price down. First is that the 43 acres that the city will acquire, and by the way, the price then comes down to about $60,000 an acre, 60,500 acre, give or take. So roughly 40% lower than what some of the comps are showing. So the 43 acres of land that the city's acquiring can be essentially reimbursed by FAA from 95 to 100%. So that drives the price down pretty significantly. 43 acres times 60,000 comes to, I think, two point something million. The other sort of good news, and we can't get into great detail about it, is that the city already has an industrial buyer for 30 acres of the 116, paying the equivalent, the per acre price that the city's paying, which is 60,000 and change for that 30 acres.
Did you say 3 or 30?
30.
Thank you.
I'm sorry, did I say 3? I meant 30. 30 acres. So 30 acres of the 116 will have a simultaneous close to the city acquiring this airport property and then obviously then acquiring the 474. Now, again, we can't get into great detail, but this industrial developer interested in the 30 acres, fair to say it's a Fortune 100 company, and it is, a strong commitment to acquire the land. They're going to start doing due diligence in the next few days, meaning they're going to do site visits, they're going to look at title, they're going to do all this stuff, so that practically speaking, if the deal is approved, the development agreement and the annexations and the rezoning are all approved, and the 30 days referendum period lapses, there's really nothing to prevent us from acquiring this land and then selling the 30 to the developer and acquiring the 474 in 1 to 2 days, 3 days after the 30-day referendum period is up. So that's the big change today, that we've again reached a accord with the developer to do this, and we're working. And just for the sort of, there were other comments that we've seen that we made. We're working on other parts of the agreement to kind of, I guess, they're really not changing the deal, but they're clarifying some things because there's some apparent confusion about the wording or the language in the agreement. Those will be rolled out in all likelihood next Tuesday.
Okay. So, John, this really took away the uncertainty we had previously when we were waiting on an appraisal for this land and not really knowing, we'd have to wait on that appraisal. This gives us a clear and certain path to close on the W parcel.
Exactly.
And then you mentioned there's a few other changes coming, as you've heard from local groups here in town and individuals that you intend to have solutions for and present on the 22nd.
Right. And those deal with, initially, there may be some other issues. Those deal with the Great Separated Crossing issue. I know that's been a concern of people. There's a provision that talks about vested rights, working on that to again, it's not changing it, it's clarifying it, because there's been some confusion. The Severn transfer of the surface water, clarifying that issue. So those that we're working on, I can say that we don't have disagreement. We're just working on the wording so that we don't have to keep sort of refining. We kind of come to what we think is clear language so that people can understand it and have some assurance or comfort level that the agreement says what it means and means what it says.
Yeah, very good. And I think just for the public's benefit, it's important to know that we've heard a lot in regard to the vested rights, and you're working on that solution. We've heard about the Severn transfer of the 375 used only for recreation and recharge. And also the council and I think the public all want a grade separated crossing. These are all things that we all are driving towards, want to get done. And so, maybe it will inform your public comment today. We have heard from a number of you on those issues, a few other issues as well. And I'm optimistic that next Tuesday, we'll be able to see those changes, John, that will support those items that we're all concerned about in the DA. With that, any questions, comment, Michael?
No, I just, to dovetail what you said, Mayor, I think value of having today as kind of an open dialogue with the public is it'll also give John and the team the ability to take the comments the public makes now and in one fell swoop handle all those issues at the 22nd instead of piecemeal the public's input and try to have a working document that goes on and on. So I just thought it was important that the other reason we're having this today is if there are things that the public wants clearly delineated or talked about, bring them forward and we'll bring them back with an answer next week. I just think that's important for people to understand.
Yeah, very good. And then the last thing I would mention is just with public comment, I want to make sure that we have plenty of time. I know last time we were here, the council's general consensus was 30 days should be adequate for public comment on the development agreement. So that's what we will drive towards here to ensure that everybody has an opportunity to comment on the development agreement. Is there any questions, comments from the council at this point before we go to public comment? All right. Jennifer? Oh, Councilman Good, did you have something?
Yeah, just a comment on this. I'm glad to hear that you're agreeing that the public at large should have at least 30 days to digest this dramatic and large and complex agreement. It's changed in many aspects over the course of the last year and a half as the negotiating team worked with the developers team. And at this point, I think it's essential that we give the public enough time to digest the entire agreement and be able to voice their concerns. And we may even be able to make a few modifications to it. So I appreciate the fact that we're at least going forward with this 30-day comment period. Thank you.
Anybody else, council? All right, Jennifer, you have folks on Zoom as well as folks here in the
don't
room.
have anybody with their hand up on Zoom, but I just want to mention that Councilmember Roosing entered at 1:14.
Oh, okay, good.
And
Yeah.
she may have.
Thank you. I'm here.
Okay. Do you have anything to say? A comment?
Councilmember Roosing?
Not right now. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, let's go to public comment.
Okay, D. Carter Labarge. Thank you, Mr. Labarge. You have 3 minutes.
Thank you. Mr. Mayor, members of the City Council, my written comments are based on last week's close, so there's a few things that have been just adjusted, but I think it's worth mentioning. The city has spent years negotiating with AED to get the DA in its present form, and we, the citizens, need more than just a few days to properly review the line-by-line 142 pages of this agreement. Last week, the council gave 30 to 60 days period for review for comments. However, the confirmation was just now confirmed at 30 days. So the issues and the importance of these decisions regarding this DA will reach far into the future, and a fast pass by the voters at this stage is not suggested. While some members of the City Council may think that just a few days is adequate, as per their belief and was stated last week, that very few voters will really read the DA and make comment, suggesting that there's voter ignorance or apathy is condescending and insulting. So therefore, I think you know that there's a large number of voters who find this particular issue quite important. The negotiation with AED is final only when one party quits negotiating. There seems to be several line items that the city has agreed to that could be enhanced further to make this deal better for the city and for the citizens of Prescott. Water and city utilities is key to this DA. While the development is inevitable, it's the City Council of Prescott's responsibility to ensure that the prize of development comes with the maximum number of benefits to the taxpayers you represent. And presently, it just seems, by the way I've read it, that the benefits seem to weigh in favor of AED, and I don't understand that. Let's just take Section 33, for instance. The 543 acres for the additional 1,000 homes that AED is not requesting to be annexed, but is requesting that the City of Prescott provide them water and sewer utilities of course, at their cost, but then maintained in perpetuity by the city of Prescott. The city will even, per the agreement, assist them in their acquisitions for the right-of-way for these utilities. And regardless of the 30% surcharge that the city gets for these utilities, why would the city of Prescott be adding this burden to a parcel that will be annexed by Prescott Valley? How is this good governance on behalf of the citizens and taxpayers of Prescott? The wording of the DA, which is more concerning, also gives additional bonus to AED to include all additional future acreage should Section 33 be expanded. And if I were AED, I'd already have that planned. Now, is this beneficial to the taxpayers? And it's signed off just by, making a notation to the record. I applaud the fact that the city has saved the 474 acres in the heart of the Dells as a permanent open space. However, there is more work to be done. Consider the grade crossing at the Peavine Trail. This DA proposes that the grand entrance for the 200-room resort is a grade level crossing and will be provided to cross the Peavine. This in and of itself is a hazard for the taxpayers to use the Peavine. Should the city desire a grade separated crossing, which they do, the taxpayers can pay the difference. How is this a good deal for taxpayers? This does not seem to be a line item that has been negotiated on the taxpayers' behalf. I think you need to keep trying until you get it right. Here's another example, the Environmental Library and Learning Center. If a 3-acre tract for a library is of great importance to the city and a benefit for the taxpayers, use the tools that are already in your hand to convince AED that it is in their interest to cede these 3+ acres to the city, and you might even ask for a financial gift to assist with the building of that library.
If you can wrap it up real quick, please.
I will. If you're hell-bent on getting this developer at this moment in time, then at least make it the best deal that you can for the taxpayers.
Thank you. John, do you want to take notes here, or do you want to comment as we go? How do you want to address?
If the council wants me to comment to various things that the speakers make, it'd probably be better just to do it sort of contemporaneously at the end, if you want.
Well, what I'm wondering is, with some thoughts about the DA that might not be accurate, it might be helpful as we go along to bring greater clarity, which will help maybe shape the following public comment.
Sure. Well, I mean, if you want, I could certainly comment to set the record straight. First of all, despite what people wish or want, the letter of intent that everybody agreed to granted AED an at-grade crossing for the resort. That was part of the sort of deal structure. Yes, it was a non-binding agreement, but at the same time, it laid out the consideration, generally speaking, that each party was going to provide and receive that structure this deal. That being said, that there is a very simple way to build or construct a grade separated crossing. And it's not at the burden of the taxpayers. It can be done by way of a community facilities district. Only if this council determines at some point in the future that it doesn't want to create a community facilities district for only the AED land, then the council would agree to pay the margin or the difference between the cost of an at-grade versus the cost of a grade separated. And again, we know, and we've heard this for a long time, that a grade separated crossing isn't necessarily an extremely expensive undertaking, because there are points in the Peavine Trail that are higher up, and bringing vehicles underneath the existing grade or slightly raising the existing grade of the Peavine and bringing cars underneath is not an extreme cost. The Section 33 issue, these are the two issues I heard, and I'm happy to address any others. The Section 33 is Section 33. It's a legal description attached to the document. It can't be expanded. It is what it is. The city has agreed to provide water and sewer to Section 33 under certain conditions. Yet the city doesn't have the obligation, if assuming again Prescott Valley annexes it, the city doesn't have any service obligations for police, fire, community or city type services to the Section 33 residents, other than the water and sewer, which again the developer pays all of the infrastructure costs. The users pay a 30% premium, and the city gets back. And I know this number, people debate the number, but the city gets back, I will just say, a considerable amount of that water that's put out as effluent for permanent recharge, which is, if it were annexed into the city, would be required under the charter provision.
Yeah, very good. Section 33 is not contiguous to current city limits, therefore we couldn't annex it
if we wanted to.
If we wanted to.
Correct.
Furthermore, I think when we were negotiating, and I've slept a couple times since we've went over Section 33, but I think one of the main points, John, with that was we wanted to, we had to get to a certain number of acre feet of water to get to an equitable deal, trading water for rocks, or for land, I should say. And, we didn't have enough land. We didn't have enough land to put the water. And so Section 33, eons ago, was a place we could put water, so to speak, in terms of units, and see that development happen and keep the development away from the point of rocks, because I think that's been the point all along.
Right. And Section 33, just to clarify, because I know this issue may have come up, Section 33, the water for Section 33 is limited to residential use. So if Prescott Valley or the developer determines that they want to put something other than residential use on Section 33, commercial or what have you, the city will not be providing water and sewer to those uses.
Yep.
I don't know if John wants to clarify, if you'd like me to. One of the other things that the gentleman brought forward is the additional land provision. The bottom line with the additional land provision is there is a cap on the water and a cap on the houses. Because he has other land he can put it on does not mean he gets entitled to any more homes or any more water. I just think that's important for people to understand.
Yep, very good. Councilman Stishka.
Thank you, Mayor. So, Michael, this deal was actually at an impasse at one point, and offering water outside of city limits to Section 33 was the driver to get this thing back going, right?
Yeah, and I would say even broader than that, Councilman Shishka, is the water in exchange for the land is the bargaining tool that's been used from the get-go to get the open space as well. The city has so many assets. The city has water assets and it has money. Obviously, a cash exchange was never a practical solution to this situation. And the best asset we had to negotiate with AED, not just for 33, but also for the rest of the project, was the water asset. And I think that the general consensus was that that was a better path to go than to try to buy this property with money we don't have.
Well, I think it's important for the public to know that.
Yeah.
All right, let's move on, Jennifer, please. I'm sorry, Councilman Blair.
Very quick, we talk about Section 33, John, being residential in scope only. Would apartment complexes be looked at as a business zoning where it wouldn't be watered, or would it be looked at as residential?
Multifamily is considered residential under all notions of zoning, whether it's condos, townhomes, or rental apartments.
Okay, I just want that aired out so somebody later on doesn't say, wait a minute, I thought we weren't going to do a commercial project where a lot of people view townhouses and rental apartments as a commercial endeavor.
One more thing, Mayor. I think everybody on this council at one point or another expressed an understanding that, when Section 33 has 89A frontage, when you talk about not having sprawl and the inevitability of some development, where you have state highway frontage is the most likely place for that development to occur. Also, the ability for the city of Prescott to have its water and PV under the city of Prescott's conservation rules and regulations was another area where I thought this council felt very comfortable with that determination.
Well, it's a very important point that this water going out to Section 33 is absolutely under our umbrella of any conservation code. John already mentioned all of the effluent goes back to permanent recharge into our aquifer, and I think that's very important. I think, Section 33, we all need to keep in mind there's an inevitability that it's going to be developed. And we feel very strongly that our water conservation code with our effluent recharge is one of the best ways to preserve our aquifer. All right, let's keep going.
Mr. Patrick Grady. Thank you, Mr. Grady. You have 3 minutes.
Thank you. Mayor and City Council, thank you. I'm Patrick Grady. I live on Rosser Street here in Prescott. In my previous professional life, I was in the field of city economic development, and my last position was as Director of Economic Development for the City of Prescott. So this afternoon, I'm just sharing some remarks and concerns relative to the full-service resort. The hotel resort is the classic quid pro quo. You already dealt with one with the Hilton Garden Inn, for example. And so it represents the purported economic benefit that the city is going to receive. Yet we really have no information or market study to confirm that we are going to get increasing tax and other revenue to be generated. It's a significant omission. In city after city, it's that analysis that every city uses to justify their public expenditure. Even for the Hilton Garden Inn deal, there were stated projected revenues. I think a timeline or deadline for market assessment and study and for quantifying the cost-benefit analysis so that citizens can visually see the public benefit is important to be incorporated into the DA. Moreover, again, with respect to the hotel property, there's no agreed upon parking phases for that phasing for that project. Another typical DA requirement. This should be in the DA. There's also a clause in the development agreement that refers to the type of hotel development uses that are allowable, and then it has the language and other acceptable uses. I think that's going to become important, and yet it's not addressed. Who determines those similar uses? There are no penalties nor stated plans for what happens to those key parcels if the hotel resort is not built. You have to protect the city in that respect. In other cases, I moved here, by the way, in 2017. In other cases that I've heard about, developers can't proceed with Project X and it all of a sudden becomes more residential. And then what happens to city expenditures for the at the below grade crossing if the hotel resort is not built? There are references, too, in the DA to that grand entrance resort that the previous speaker spoke to. That entrance will not only potentially disrupt the flow of activity, but it could destroy the aesthetics of the trail itself. And yet there doesn't appear to be any timelines or design approval for that entrance and its impacts. AD should be required to have all site plan approvals in place before the city begins construction of that crossing into the grand entrance. I believe it's always important for cities to undertake due diligence in their negotiations. A year has passed since the LOI was approved. The information analysis that I've referred to, whether it be a market analysis, cost-benefit study, or even estimates of the city's potential financial obligations triggered by this extensive DA and alluded to throughout the DA, all this should be well documented and in place in order to assess that statement in paragraph J of the DA that states the development of the project will result in significant planning and economic benefits to the city. You need to show that to the public, that you looked at the cost benefit prior to approving a deal of this magnitude.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. John, just make a couple notes on the tax and the water.
Right. So again, if the CFD is approved and builds the grade separated crossing, it is not a burden on the general population or general resident taxpayer base of the city. It is a burden on the property owners in the CFD, which is limited to AED land. The other assurance that the city has that it's a hotel or lodging or resort or nothing is, or there's two. The zoning, which is called SPC, lodging is limited to lodging. Additionally, the water allocated to parcels K and L up to 200, to serve up to 200 rooms is limited to lodging. So any other use on parcels K and L, A, would require a zoning change, and B, would require the city to amend the development agreement to allow for water, something other than lodging.
Which is not residential. Lodging is very specific.
Lodging is lodging. Hotel, resort. Yeah, it's not residential.
And there is a provision for collecting the tax.
Right. Yeah, there is a provision that if it's something other than a traditional hotel that generates TPT and bed tax, then there's a formula that gets worked out that the operator at the time, and again, this agreement binds future owners and operators of the land, that is worked out to compensate, I guess, or make up for any lost TPT if, for instance, the resort turns into some sort of, let's say, partial timeshare type project that doesn't necessarily generate sales and bed tax. Now, sometimes it does, because if you own a timeshare and you rent it, then that generates the TPT and bed tax. But if it's an owner-occupied type, what's it called, segment, that wouldn't necessarily generate. So again, there is protection. There are protections in the agreement that talk about that. And last but not least, the city did way back in the fall. We had a cost benefit analysis that was very favorable to the city that was presented back in the fall, and that's online if people want to look at it.
Yeah, City of Prescott already did a economic feasibility study on that at the end of last year, is what you're suggesting. All right, let's go on to the next one.
Mr. Jeff Martin. Thank you, Mr. Martin. You have 3 minutes.
Okay, thank you. Hi, Council. Last time I came in here, I was advocating for the preservation and protection of what I believe one of the largest and most concentrated archaeological sites in the Prescott area. Since then, during the COVID pandemic, I got a chance to do a survey and a report in collaboration with Dr. Andy Christensen at the former Smoke Eye Museum of Indigenous People. My question is, and I did not get to read the report, I've been too busy. So what did we do with the preservation of that site? Is it included in open space? Just a little bit of an idea of where it's at. It is about 120 meters southeast of Old Highway 89. The reason I'm advocating for this is, number one, it's very significant, but we find trade, ideology, and influence all the way down into Mesoamerica, which is ancient Mexico. I believe that without doing the excavation, I believe that there's a significant individual that lived there, and we do see evidence of a platform mound or a Pueblo mound, red on buff pottery from the Phoenix Valley, black on white from the Flagstaff area. So again, my question is did we include that in the negotiation? I'm still unclear.
Thank you, Mr. Martin. Anything else?
That'll do it.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, the developer is required to follow not only all city requirements, city code regulations, policies, but also county, state, and federal law. And in the case of where there is a purported archaeological site, the developer has to follow federal law called the Antiquities Act. And it's a very extensive process and survey to determine what's there and what they can then do about whatever they find there, whether it's remove it, leave it in place. So that's a process that would apply to that location as well as any other location that was determined to be an archaeological type area.
Very good. Jennifer?
Jan Malone.
Hi.
So a lot of my comments are no longer relevant because I'm really encouraged that you have listened to the feedback from citizens of Prescott and are making changes to more clearly define this agreement. Because when I read it as a simple layperson, I scratch my head because it so clearly defines what the city has to do, but it does not clearly define what AED has to do. So I'm encouraged to hear that you're going to further clarify a lot of these things. I have to say that if each of you were signing this personal agreement, you would strive for a more clearly defined document or development agreement. And I would also request that once you make these clarifications, you give us the 30 days. You talk about extending the 30 days. I don't know when the 30-day period starts. But since I don't still have a clearly defined development agreement, that 30-day period can't start yet, in my opinion. Thank you.
Thank you. At this point, I think we're going to look at July 13th as a possible vote by the council. And John, as we go here, probably after the 22nd, once you make changes, I would assume next week you'd have that reposted to the website.
Right. We're going to post this and a clean version to probably sometime today. This what I'm pointing to is that. And then when the other changes get rolled out on the 22nd, we'll put those on the website as well. And again, these aren't going, this shouldn't take days and days and days to read and understand. I mean, it's not like we're rewriting the whole agreement. And if I could just say, Mayor, that it's sort of I shouldn't say sort of, it is a misstatement to say that there's all these protections for the developer and none for the city, and that there's all these obligations on the city but not on developer. The developer has a bunch of unconditional obligations, not the least of which is to convey 474 acres of private property to the city at sort of no cash cost, as well as another 270 acres at the airport, and then 375 acres of a sever and transfer of surface water. So there's a bunch of things in the agreement. So it's not accurate to say that this agreement favors AED and the AED has no obligations and the city has all these obligations, or there's all these protections in the agreement for AED and not the city. This was a long time negotiated agreement that is in my view a very even document. Once neither side or the other has any significant advantage. And I think the other thing that folks have to realize is that once the property is annexed into the city, it's in the city forever. It can't get out. So, so the development rights that the developer has now in the county go away, and they rely then on the development rights they're getting in this agreement. So once they're in the city and once the 30 days is up, obviously if you're the developer part in this, you want some assurances that you're going to get what you're bargaining for too. So it is a very even document. And again, to reiterate, the changes that we're going to roll out next week won't change necessarily the substance of the deal. It'll just help people maybe better understand what some of the terms mean.
Yeah, I think in addition, John, we need to remember that the developer has to follow the Land Development Code, Universal Building Code, city, state, federal laws. So there's a lot of strings, and that's the advantage, I would say, of annexation, is we get to control what it looks like. And that's really what we want to do with this development, is make it look the way we want it to look. And in order to do that, we have to annex it. And then I think it's a good segue for my good friend Councilman Blair to talk a little bit about the Land Development Code, because I think that's something that we want to address here in the coming months to ensure that we update that. Councilman Blair?
That's been something that's been a long time coming. I sat on the last Land Development Code process. George was on it as well back there, George Worley for the Planning Department. And I would suspect after our conversation today, Mr. Lamar, that we will be convening a group of people that I believe, George, correct me if I'm wrong, it was 2 city councilmen, 2 of the folks on planning and zoning, and 2 from the Board of Adjustment, or 1. And we went through and scrubbed the whole land planning document, and we need to go back through and just do an adjustment because I think it's about 10 years old at this point. So.
And just for clarity with this, John, if we change the Land Development Code, say in the next 6-7 months, which is I think what our council intention is. Would this agreement cover any of those changes? Would they apply to this development agreement?
It really depends on the nature of the changes. For instance, if we change building requirements, let's say and a big issue is sound or noise attenuation. If the building requirements change, the building code, whether it's building code or land development code, and those changes apply sort of universally or citywide or where applicable, then those changes the new requirements would, the AED would be required to follow those new requirements at the time they're pulling building permits. But again, the policies that, for instance, how we calculate water per household at now 0.17 unit, that's something that will freeze in place at the change of the agreement. So up or down. So in other words, if we determine later on that single-family residential is really a 0.14 use, that doesn't increase the allotted densities for AED. So, or if we determine later on, well, let's put it back to 0.35, that won't affect AED. So I hate to give you that it depends answer,
Sure.
but it depends.
Yep. Councilman Stichka.
Thanks, Mayor. So, John, how can we make it easier for the public who actually does read the DA to find these changes?
Well, what we're going to do is we're going to post them like this separately in the same place that the development agreement is now online and the PowerPoint from last week. We're going to post these as separate documents. So this will be titled, Section 4.3 or revised Section 4.3. So this now replaces the Section 4.3 that's in the big 172-page document. This will be the new language for that. And so the same we'll do the same for the other sort of clarifying changes. Mm-hmm. We'll put those as separate documents or separate pages, so that you don't have to sit there and wind your way through again the 170 pages. We'll make sure that these are standalone documents that people can see that are going to be that are ultimately will be incorporated in the whole document when it's time to vote.
Excellent, thank you,
Mr. Lamar.
Yeah, Mayor, I just had a suggestion, and I'm putting words in John's mouth, but I'm sure he'd be comfortable with this. Is as we get questions from the public, and they want a common sense, plain English answer, just answer their question online. In other words, if the question is about the water transfer, we'll just, this is where the DA protects the fact we're going to get the 375 acres. This is how. I think that would be valuable if the rest of you think there's value to that.
I would.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it makes a lot of sense, and I think we can look at grouping a lot of these under whether it's vested rights or the 375 acre feet of severed and transferred water or the grade separated, whatever those categories are. There's probably something logical that makes sense to group those questions together and then answer them that way online. Jennifer?
Brandon Montoya.
Hi, Mayor and Council. Thank you for opening this up to the public for comment today. I came to the last meeting last week, and I just want to follow up on something that came up, and I think it was from a public comment from someone about a table that was going to be developed out to kind of lay out the costs and that kind of thing, and I just wanted to know where that stood. In my review prior to this meeting, I didn't see it on the website, so I was just curious if maybe I missed it.
It was actually Gary Beverly who asked for a timeline. And we were working on that, but because of some of the things like this are being revised, it didn't make any sense to put a timeline based on the former version of the document when these things change. So there were maybe, as we go forward, some other changes that apply or that will apply to the agreement. So once we kind of have a final document, then we'll put that timeline out.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Montoya.
Now we do have a few commenters on Zoom, and I'll start with Rory Levy. Rory?
Yes, good afternoon, Mayor and council members and other officials. Thank you for allowing me to speak. I have a few comments about the situation there in terms of what kind of cell tower construction or what locations are being proposed for this as part of the AED development agreement. I didn't see any mention of either specific cell tower locations or any new cell tower construction. And I would just like to know where that would be. That's just one comment. And in terms of everything else, this question's on, was there any pre-planning involved as part of the different meetings that have taken place on having discussion of where the cell locations would be? And I would like that to see that in detail. And I see that, I mean, is there a pre-planned designated area in the proposed developments for the cell tower construction, as the Planning and Zoning Commissioners stated they wanted to see in the new development plans? And any new development of cell towers in the Prescott neighborhood to serve this next area would definitely not be the way to go and would not be the answer. So just wondering, there's nothing at all, and yet we're possibly, potentially, so at least I understand, talking about a potential voting meeting June 24th after the June 22nd next study session. If we're going to keep to the 30-day clock of the letter of intent, that would be fine, because then we can delve into these issues like what I'm asking. And I would like to have comments, not today, but for you to think about it and think about how to address the cell service for all the more than 3,000 residents in these subject parcels as part of the annexation and the many guests of the private resort and hotels.
This is Kathy Rusing. Can you hear me? I'd like to address the Mr. Levy.
Yes.
Thank you. Mr. Levy makes a very good point. We need to stop surprising the single-family homeowners in our master plan communities with water tanks and cell towers in their backyards. So I think that this master plan should have a designation for future cell tower sites and water tanks built into it so that people know where they're going to go and not be surprised. And we can plan for these things, because it's very important for public safety and communication to have these cell towers. But the problem is they need to be in an area where people know they're going to be and not be surprised by them. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Rusing. Thank you, Mr. Levy.
Okay, next is Howard Mechanic. Hi, Howard. Can you hear us?
Thank you, Mayor and Council. I have a couple questions and a comment. And I appreciate Mr. Shiska asking how can these changes be easily accessible to the public. And I have one suggestion, because the development agreement was posted, but the way I look at it, it seems like it's an image that was made into a PDF, and it's not searchable by words. So if I was looking for something, I'd have to go through the 175 pages. So if you have any lengthy documents, I'd appreciate it if it could be a searchable document. The other question is regarding the changes to this W parcel. And I'm not totally familiar with what it covers, but, and correct me if I'm wrong, is part of that in the creek bed? If so, that would be certainly less valuable than properties in the airport area that are flat and buildable. So I was wondering if that's the case, how that valuation was determined. And well, I did compliment Mr. Shiska, but I'm also going to bring up a point that I had a problem with from last meeting when he asked for the public, and it seemed to me he was asking the public to trust him and the council and staff on these issues. It's not a matter of trust. It's a matter of the public being able to ask questions, being concerned, and being involved in the process. And I'd like to remind council and the public that back in 1910, the citizens of Arizona got together at a constitutional convention, and there was strong support for the citizens being involved, specifically in the areas of referendum and initiative. And the citizens ceded to legislative bodies certain powers, but the citizens kept certain powers. So the citizens, I believe, should be encouraged, not discouraged, when involvement in city affairs. And the initiatives and referendums haven't been used much, but they have been used effectively when necessary. Back in 2005, the voters of Prescott overwhelmingly approved the Reasonable Growth Initiative, Proposition 400. And at that time, Prescott citizens were concerned, and they thought council was involved in too many giveaways to large developers. It had shown not enough concern for the public's quality of life. So they were forced to do something that council wouldn't do, and overwhelmingly they approved that. I think we need to thank council for your work on this agreement. We need to thank Mr. Giese for his extensive work. I think we're close to an agreement here. It's very important for all parties concerned. We also have to thank Save the Dells. We have to thank the citizens who've been involved in this, because if the citizens were not involved, we would have had an agreement 3 years ago, which would be not anywhere close to as good as this agreement. We need to encourage citizen involvement for that reason. And I think that we're getting a much better deal than we would have gotten 3 years ago.
Thank you, Mr. Mechanic. Your time is up.
Okay, let me finish up. What I'm saying is, if we didn't have the Proposition 400, we would have had a lot worse deal. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mechanic.
Brenda Smith. Brenda, are you there?
Tom, are you going to talk?
Oh, is that yeah, this is Tom Rusin.
We're asking for
Smith, please.
Brenda Smith.
Oh, Brenda Smith.
Got a lot of feedback.
Councilmember Rusing, if you could mute at this point, that'd be great until we call you in. We're looking for Brenda Smith.
Okay, we can just move on to Tom Rusing then. Okay, Mr. Rusing, you have 3 minutes.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
You're able to hear me? Okay. This is Tom Rusing. I would like to thank Howard Mechanic for his comments. I would also, I've been asked by to read this letter sent to the council by a concerned citizen, John Cacardi. He has been and is a chief financial officer for several companies and has dealt with many complex contracts and agreements. And his letter states, I am very concerned about Arizona Eco Development Pre-Annexation Development Agreement that Prescott is considering entering into with Arizona Eco Development. In general, there appears to be several situations where the agreement obligates the city to perform certain functions or to forego certain rights where AED obligations are not clearly defined, less than specific, or subject to mutual agreement with the city. Take the time to make sure this agreement is thorough and the obligations and rights on both sides are clearly defined. As I interpret the agreement, the transfer of open space land surrounding the Point of Rocks and elsewhere does not happen when the city annexes the parcel. The open space land transfer is contingent on other acts, most notably the city's acquisition of AED land near the airport. In my opinion, this is not acceptable. When the land is annexed and the water rights committed, the city provides tremendous value to AED. At that time, the title to the open space needs to be transferred. There is no excuse for doing it any other way. Take the time to do it right. The value of land the city is to purchase is not set in the agreement. Instead, it will be via an appraisal process. Why? AED and the city need to do their appraisals and other work on the front end, then agree on the value of the land and put that price into this agreement, thereby removing any uncertainty about the price the city will pay. Take the time to do it right. The agreement specifies several situations where obligations or required performances will be defined by mutual agreement. Mutual agreement clauses sound good, but in my experience, if you run into a disagreement, they can become complicated to resolve, forcing one to accept the unacceptable or to go to court. Avoid this by getting more definition in the agreement before committing to it. Take the time to do it right. I have been a CFO of a major corporation, and if an attorney brought this agreement to me, I would reject it due to what I view as unclear obligations and responsibilities of AED. A document with this many situations where the commitments and obligations of AED are vague or poorly defined has a very high risk of the city not getting what it expects or ending up in court to enforce a contract with poorly defined obligations. Take the time to do it right. It appears that the city may need to bring in outside legal counsel so that the city can have a much higher degree of certainty on what it will get from this agreement. The Dells are a tremendous asset that cannot be replicated. The city and council have an obligation to the citizens of Prescott to make sure they do it right. That's the end of his letter, and that's John Kikerty. I agree with this letter and feel there are multiple ambiguities and contingencies that need to be addressed prior to a final agreement. And it will take time to do it right. The citizens deserve a better annexation agreement. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Roosing. I don't know if you tuned in late or maybe didn't understand at the very beginning the presentation that Mr. Palladini did, but we covered the W parcel. There is no uncertainty. There is no waiting for an appraisal at this point on the purchase of that property, and it will be expedited shortly after the referendum period has expired. Next public comment.
Leslie Hoy.
Good afternoon. Excuse me, Mayor and Council. I have two questions and then one short comment. At the June 8th study session, Gary Beverly did suggest that the city compile a table listing all the performance deadlines in the DA for both the city and Arizona Eco, but he also suggested the associated costs be listed, and that kind of goes to the letter that Tom Roosing just read. The citizens, taxpayers of Prescott need to know what are the financial obligations we're being obligated to, and what are and what is AED being obligated to. We need to understand the financial obligations being placed on current and future Prescott residents. So my question is to Mr. Palladini, if he is going to make a table with the timelines, is he also going to include the financial obligations? So that's one question. And then speaking of financial obligations, I haven't found this yet in the DA, but who is paying for the infrastructure to transport the effluent from Section 33 to the water treatment plant? And then my quick comment is for Councilman Sischka. At the last Prescott Water Issues Subcommittee meeting, we found that the water resource management model has now calculated the acre feet per residential use at 0.18. So the 0.17 we've been using is incorrect. And I don't know if we'll ever get to 0.14, but people need to know that that's what the fact is. So I'd appreciate answers to my two questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Leslie. The one's real simple in terms of the infrastructure across over to Section 33, which we covered earlier in this presentation. That is the burden of the developer to get that infrastructure. All infrastructure, for that matter, Leslie, is the burden of the developer. In terms of the cost, Michael, do you have a comment?
Well, it was actually going to be about Leslie's comment. The 0.18 is an average citywide. the expectation that new home construction will be 0.17 or less is a very reasonable expectation. I just think that's important for everybody to know.
There's probably been some progress and technology improvement over time since. Right. Okay.
And Mayor, just let me.
This is Kathy Rusing. I'd like to address.
Yeah, hang on just a second, Councilmember Rusing. I've got John here.
You know, the numbers are in the document. Again, it's impossible to emphasize enough that the city has no obligation to build any infrastructure. That's all on the developer. That's tens, if not hundreds of millions of dollars that are on the developer. The city, and I brought this up last time, gets $9 million plus of land in this deal. Yes, the city is going to acquire land, both the land that's described in this section as well as 130 additional acres at the end of the runway, which will be financed by FAA money. But this acquisition, as I described earlier, is whittled down significantly by the two factors, and the city has 86 acres leftover land, if you will, on that W parcel to recoup the purchase price and perhaps then some. So the problem with trying to put out some sort of cost chart is it's impossible to know, because I wouldn't hazard a guess as to what AED is going to invest, what it has invested and what it will invest in infrastructure. And that would be a critical fact or point to make to show sort of the cost obligations and the cost benefits. And I wouldn't even hazard to guess what the benefits are going to be in terms of profits to AED. It's way beyond my wheelhouse. So, but the bottom line is there's $9 million at least of land that the city's getting. And yes, the city will acquire other land as an investment. And then there's the 375 acre surface water that's going to be preserved for recreation and recharge. And so the only, and to address the prior question or prior comment, the only sort of agreement to enter into an agreement or to negotiate a price is for that 3 acres. At the environmental library, up to 3 acres at the environmental library. There aren't any other sort of contingency type deals. Even the 130 acres at the end of the runway is not negotiated. It's determined by an expert airport appraiser, and the parties agree on on that price.
Yeah, very good. And you mentioned that 3 acre piece over there, John, as a part of the Library Learning Center. And I think, we can negotiate moving forward with a developer on that, but I think with real specific land planning that's going to happen, and there's a much better understanding of what all this looks like, how it fits in there. As we get farther along, I think there's a real opportunity for us to go back and talk about that once we better know exactly what that looks like.
So the idea or the environmental library is notional at this point. We don't know what it looks like finally, so we can't determine a price because we don't know whether we need 0 acres or up to 3. So you really can't negotiate a price. And again, it's a benefit to both the city and I think to AED if this project goes in, and all of those things get factored into a purchase price.
Yes, Councilmember Rusing.
Thank you. I apologize for the interruption. It's
okay.
Always awkward when you're trying to Zoom a meeting and try to jump in.
No worries.
So thank you. I would just like to make some comments about Leslie Hoy from CWAG. As you know, we're considering a massive annexation in the middle of a 30-year drought. We're using more groundwater. Our aquifer is dropping. And so we need to really be very, very careful in how this water is being used as we allocate it to AED. And on page 15, paragraph 2.6a, he wants an exception to our plant palette. He wants to be able to use whatever he wants out in the right of way along the roads. And I just don't think that's fair. We're supposed to be conserving water, and I think everyone needs to get on board with that, and we shouldn't make exceptions. And then on page 18, 2.17, under city treated effluent, we need to make sure that the developer understands that he must use treated effluent and not pump potable groundwater for his dust control and construction use. I just don't think that's a good policy. I mean, everyone else uses effluent, and the wording says the developer may, at the developer's discretion, use city-treated effluent. And we need to change that to the developer must. And also for Section 33, has anyone asked if Prescott Valley, if it gets annexed into Prescott Valley, if they will have treated effluent to use? Because I think we should all work together and minimize pumping groundwater for dust control and for construction uses. Thank you.
Mayor, can I address those comments to clarify? Sure. So the 2.6 subparagraph A does not allow for the developer to use anything other than what's on our plant palette. It says that the developer shall landscaping must be low water and meet all requirements of the applicable rules, including installation of plants from the city's drought-tolerant plant list. Yeah, we will maintain the xeriscape landscaping. That's gravel. That's rock. There's nothing to that. That's our standard. That's a water conservation tool that we use for our medians. Now, like Prescott Lakes, if there is
Mr. Palladini, the last sentence says if he desires to install landscaping other than xeriscape, which may include plants from the city's drought-tolerant plant list, developers shall be responsible for maintenance of such landscape.
Right. So that means he had that the plants are from the drought-tolerant plant list. That's what that says. So xeriscape is nothing. Anything other than xeriscape, any planting in the medians has to be from the city's plant list, which is ADWR's plant list. So not sure where that's coming from. And then the other issue about use of groundwater versus effluent for dust control is that only if the city cannot or will not provide treated effluent for dust control, then may the developer, or then the developer is allowed to ask for potable water. But so I'm not sure again where this idea is coming from that it's a choice. Only if the city cannot or will not provide treated effluent to the developer. So I guess
isn't that a pretty small possibility though?
Well, again, it's the city's choice if the city cannot or will not provide effluent. So if we choose not to, then you have to do dust control. So you got to use water to do dust control. So it's either treated effluent, and if we cannot or will not, then the option of using groundwater comes into play. That's, I think, your two choices, other than rain dance.
Councilman Sischka.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. I'd like to go back to the cost-benefit situation. A couple of the benefits, one, impact fees that we haven't talked about, and that's a lot of money. And I know that within 10 years we have to invest in public infrastructure to benefit that area with those impact fees, but also, and one of the areas that we lost out with Stringfield Ranch, was that internet sales have to pay tax to the entity where the houses reside. Well, in Stringfield Ranch, we're no longer able to get those internet sales taxes. What we are going to get is a lot of internet sales taxes if we annex the AED properties.
All right, let's move on to the next public comment.
I'll try Brenda Smith again, or are you able to unmute yourself, Brenda? Okay. Let's move on to Kaya Hayes. Kaya, can you unmute yourself, please?
Yes.
Kaya?
Great. Thank you. Before I comment, I'd like to thank the mayor and council for hearing the public's input regarding the timeline for public input and responding with an extension of 30 days. I appreciate that greatly. I wanted to touch on the comment earlier from Michael regarding the archaeological resources and the pit house site on some of the parcels identified in this annexation. I believe it was Councilman Blair who brought up the Antiquities Act and cited it as a potential protection and regulation of these resources. The Antiquities Act allows for the president to grant protected status to significant landmarks, structures, and objects, but for federally regulated lands. So unfortunately, I don't believe that this applies to this particular scenario. Additionally, while there are a myriad of other federal, state, and sometimes city level protections, these all again apply to public land. And so unfortunately, with the exception of certain rematriation laws for human remains, the treatment of archaeological and historical resources on private land is at the discretion of the landowner, and protected largely by private property laws like trespassing, vandalism. And so I would like to respectfully request some clarification from the council on the following points. A, has the city engaged in any dialogue with the developer regarding these resources and their protection? And B, has the city made an attempt to acquire the land containing at least a portion of these invaluable pieces of the area's heritage in order to protect them under existing state and city regulations? Considering that the Library and Learning Center is so close to this location, it would be a shame to miss out on this opportunity to preserve such an amazing and hands-on learning resource for visitors and residents alike. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments and questions.
Do you mind if I
go ahead?
I'm actually glad Kaya asked this question because I was sitting here thinking it's probably good for the public to understand that there are instances, and this is in no way a criticism of the applicant, where the city asked and we were told no. We talked about trying to acquire or own vis-a-vis a donation of the ruins. We were told that that's not something that the applicant's comfortable doing now. It's the same thing with the donation of the 3 acres. We asked, and in a negotiation, sometimes you ask and you don't get what you asked for. And that's okay. It's okay that the applicant said no, and it's okay that we asked, but the questions were asked. So for the public to think that we just ignored these things is a misnomer, and maybe we just need to say that. These things were put out there, and in a lot of cases, we got what we wanted, and in some cases, we didn't. I think that's okay, though.
See, our negotiation, I think, you're not necessarily going to walk away with everything you asked for. And I think we've done a pretty good job when you look at the 474 acres around the Point of Rocks. I think that was the priority, among other things. But it's a good point. Thanks, Michael. Next public comment.
There are no further public comments.
All right. Thank you all for coming and for your public comments. Before we go, I thought I would allow the applicant who is here to maybe address some of the things that has come up today and speak to the development agreement. Mr. Giese.
Mayor, members of the council, Jason Giese, Arizona Eco Development, thank you. Certainly don't want to sit here and pick at things. What my main concerns are at this point in the process is that big picture items get understood. And specifically, when we talk about the mutual promises that are in the development agreement between the city of Prescott and Arizona Eco, the thing that may not be real clear to the public is that what AED is also committed to is following a land development code policy that is city of Prescott that exists. The Universal Building Code, again, policy that exists today. In the case of the avigation easement, we've made a concession as it relates, and I'll butcher this, so bear with me, to the amount of noise, the noise attenuation. I think I got the word right. So that the buildings have higher standards than what the Universal Building Code is today. And so I don't expect members of the public to understand real estate real well. And so I always try to be patient as I go through these processes because there's always a learning curve. But I think that it's important for me to say, it's been said by staff and council folks, but it's important for me to say that we have not asked to change your land development code, have a variance from it, and certainly in the main instance where there was a concern about the vertical structures and noise attenuation, we have agreed to that, and that exists within the body of this document. Along those lines, whenever we're talking about water in the city of Prescott, that's a hot button issue as long as I've lived here for 26 or 27 years. And so that people can understand the paragraph that talks about medians in and the landscaping, xeriscape versus your plant palette. It's always easier for me to think about it in the form of what's actually going on in the ground. So on Willow Creek Road, by example, we have river rock. The river rock doesn't occur anywhere near Willow Creek Road, but the median heading north on Willow Creek Road is river rock and no other plants. There's no irrigation. So I guess it would have been dirt in the median or river rock. Okay, so we don't want river rock in our median. We would like our median to look attractive. I'm sorry if I've offended you in saying that yours is not attractive. When we gussy up that median, because I'm sure that we're going to end up doing that, we then have to pick from your pre-approved plant palette, trees, shrubs, so that our choice is limited, which we've agreed to do. And if we do that, then it switches the cost of maintaining that median over to us or our homeowners association. So it takes it out of the public sector's purview to maintain it. That could be a hassle and from a cost perspective. And I thought that was something that I ought to speak to. Last thing, there's a loose end that relates to this environmental library. Joe Bain shared with us at the last meeting that we support the action. We understand the vision. We support where Prescott is going with this. And then practically speaking, I also understand that when we see a first generation master plan, those things tend to change over the course of time. There's comment from the public ahead that may change that. There's pricing when you actually bid it that may change that. I think that it's important for me to say that from my perspective, I'm sure that a wonderful master plan can be put together without the environmental library on our land, and it would be on your land. In the event that is not the case, the city always holds a trump card that is eminent domain. You could take the land from us. You can't take it from us and not pay us. And in the past, by way of example, because there's been lots of negotiations, the end of the runway, there were threats of condemnation. And the answer from me was fine. The court will sort it out. We get a check. We don't get it stolen from us. We get compensated. So I think I wanted to make that point because the land that we're contemplating for the environmental library is good land. It's A+ land. The land where the Indian ruins exist is A+ land. Why are we not making decisions in the context of this agreement in this moment of time? We have made massive concessions with A+ land to get to this point. The areas, I don't want to call it a hot spot, but the areas to be considered, an agreement to be arrived at in the future, are minor in comparison to everything that has gone into this document. And there are options available to the city of Prescott as we move into that future. As I sit here today, my goal will be to resolve these issues in an amicable fashion. That's in our best interest, in accordance with the rules, the policies, and the laws, however they exist. And so those were the three items that I thought it was important for me to speak to today. If you have any questions, I'm happy to answer them.
Questions for Ms.
I'd like a comment.
Yeah, go ahead, Councilmember Rusing.
Thank you, Mr. Giese, for being here and answering our questions. This massive development will be a big community, and it's going to require more fire and police. And public safety is very important. And we need to keep our response times low and decrease them as much as we can. So we probably will be needing a police fire substation to serve this new community. Have you thought of anything in the master plan, setting aside, donating some land to for something for fire and police?
Councilmember Rusing, in the past there was a discussion about police and fire, and at the original application that a piece of land was located or identified, I should say, for that use. Not in the recent past, but in the past there's been conversations about the efficiencies of operating multiple locations in North Prescott versus the response times. To date, the answer has been that the facilities in and around the airport would suffice for the future. If the question is, would we consider that, the answer is that we have in the past. The items that you've mentioned are important to us, and we are not opposed to locating or identifying those locations if that's where the city has come back around to. That doesn't bother me. I would add this, that what I would propose, under if you need land in the area, then we would ask for a clawback provision. So if the city didn't use it within like a 10-year period of time, then it would revert back to our ownership.
Okay, thank you very much. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, and just as a dovetail what Jason's saying, and thank you for that offer, Jay. But we've got into a situation historically in this community where a decision's made based on somebody donating land, and then you have a fire station on Smoke Tree. So going forward, I would rather the decision making about where a fire station go not be as much about the donated dirt as to where the appropriate place to put a fire station is.
Oh, I agree 100%. That's why we need to involve Chief Light in these decisions.
Thanks, Councilmember Rusing. Councilman Sushka.
Thank you, Mayor. Jason, I know we were just talking about location of things, and I know that with cell towers, pretty much it's the generation of cell towers are by a cell tower location company. But have you considered possible cell sites?
So I was stumped. The answer is no, we have not. I'm not opposed to cell sites, and the answer is yes. Normally the private sector comes and proposes those sites. I'm a part of another development that got quite a bit of pushback over a cell tower. And so I understand the issue, and I do believe that if cell towers are needed, and to identify them ahead of time before there are no residents would be very beneficial. So I'm not opposed to that. I think that's a good thing. I don't know where it would be. I won't share because it'll get me in trouble where I was thinking where it ought to go. But and frankly, I don't know about coverage in the north part of town. It might be sufficient today already. I don't know.
Any other questions for Mr. Giese at this time? All right. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'd like to make a comment about water.
Yes. Let me get to, we have one more Zoom comment, and then we'll come back to council. Do you have one more Zoom comment?
Yes, I do. Ralph Hess. Ralph, can you please unmute yourself?
Yes, I think I have. So good afternoon, Mayor and Council. I did come prepared to make some substantive comments, but I think it's premature based on what we heard early on, that you're going to be presenting a modified development agreement on the 22nd. So what I would like to address is, one thing is to echo the suggestion that the 30 days for public comment be extended to begin on June 22nd. after the presentation of the revised development agreement. I heard that from one of the speakers earlier. And then I have a couple questions. Mayor, you had set out I guess the council had set out a schedule of meetings with a proposed vote on, I think, June 29th. So what meetings, whether you extend the 30 days beyond to begin on June 22nd, or if you hold to your intent to have a vote on July 13th, what meetings do you expect to have scheduled in between those dates to have public comment? And the second question is seeking a little clarification regarding the discussion and conversations related to the cost chart. I guess that Mr. Palladini had indicated he would provide in response to a question from Gary Beverly last week. It sounded like to me that the city is saying that it's impossible to know what the costs are going to be to the city under the development agreement. And I would just like some clarification on that.
Very good. Thank you, Mr. Hess. We will address those questions. Jennifer, anybody else on Zoom?
No, nobody else on Zoom.
Okay. And could you characterize, you have a kind of summary of comments that you'd like to summarize for us?
Sure. So effective 4 p.m. June 14th, a total of 25 emails have been received through aedcouncil@prescott-az.gov email address, and they are classified as follows: crossing of the Peavine Trail at grade versus above grade and safeguards for pedestrian, equestrian, bicyclists, 6 total. Additional time for public review and comment, 9 total. Guarantees to AED outweighing those to the city, 9 total. Water protections, 8 total. Cell tower plans, 4 total. Specific agreement to all Save the Dells recommended revisions, 1. Transfer of land to be simultaneous with annexation and DA adoption, 6. No increased density, 3. In addition to comments received through the AED specific email address, council administrative staff received the following and have forwarded them accordingly: 11 emails for all of council, 12 emails for city manager Lamar, 17 emails for Mayor Mangarelli. Of comments received on all platforms, 12 individuals sent identical comments through multiple email addresses. Additionally, city clerk staff and council administrative staff have received and forwarded all comments received after 4 p.m. June 14th through 12 p.m. today to the mayor and council for review.
Very good. Thank you, Jennifer. So let's wrap up with any council comments, and then I'll speak to the timeline. Did you want to mention anything on Mr. Hess's question regarding the costs?
Apparently, it was he misunderstood what I said. What I said is that it's impossible to know what the investment or cost to AED will be in terms of how much the infrastructure is going to cost. You know, at the end of the day, there's very little cost in terms of cash outlay by the city. Purchasing property, the 131 plus what we talked about today is one such cash outlay. Other than that, the $9 million in land we're getting for no cash outlay is part of the agreement. You know, the city, and I'll emphasize this again, the city has zero obligation to build any infrastructure as part of this project. Zero.
So we don't have any outlay for infrastructure from the city of Prescott.
Let me qualify. There is a development impact fee project, which is paid for by development for the crossing of Granite Creek. It's not a street tax project. It's not a general fund project. It is an impact fee project that will pay the cost of the low water crossing that we showed the sort of couple of designs last week. That's one project the city will pay for. Again, that when I shouldn't say that development will pay for, because it's paid for by impact fees.
Yeah, and then thanks for your patience. One more thing occurs to me, John. Can you speak to Prescott Valley regarding Section 33? Had some action recently. I think it's important that the public know what's going on.
So, as part of what we all presume to be the annexation process of Section 33 by Prescott Valley, the Prescott Valley Town Council last week approved an intergovernmental agreement to allow the city of Prescott to provide water and sewer to Section 33 when it's developed. Again, that the condition to the developer is they must follow the city of Prescott's water conservation code requirements, including outdoor landscaping and those kinds of things, as well as all of our very strict plumbing code for fixtures and those kinds of things. The rest of the project is going to be, again, presumably after annexation, going to be governed by Prescott Valley. The town is obligated to provide Prescott with necessary easements for water and sewer through the public streets that go through there, but that's about it. So it is going to be governed, and again, the municipal services provided to those houses in Section 33 will be provided by Town of Prescott Valley.
Yeah, very good. It doesn't obligate us, John, at this point, but it is a step in the process if we choose to vote for annexation down the road.
Right. If this deal is approved, part of the approval process, as I said last week, part of the vote, the series of votes that will occur, will be this same IGA that the Town of Council of Prescott Valley approved last week will be in front of you to vote on as well.
All right, questions, comments from the council. Mayor Pro Tem, thank you for your patience.
Thanks, Mayor. Thank you all for being here today. I appreciate all the public comment we've received, and we've received some really constructive feedback that we've taken into consideration and will be implementing, as you'll see next week. We've also continued some really constructive conversations with Save the Dells, and we continue to meet with them on a weekly basis to hear their concerns. I know that they have a good following and many constituents who support their cause. So we continue to listen to them and to take what they have to say into consideration. I think we're really close. I think we have come a long way from where we were a year ago. We've made really great progress this last 5 months. And I think we're kind of right on the precipice of a really beneficial deal for the city of Prescott to have 474 acres of prime Granite Dells land in our open space portfolio in perpetuity. That land will continue to be open space for many generations to come. So I appreciate everyone's help. I appreciate staff's many hours and council's patience and the community's patience. Stick with us. We're really close. And I mean it this time. I think I've said that before, that we're close, but I really feel that this is happening. We're really close.
Good comments. Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. Any other comments from the council? Yeah, Councilman Sishkin.
I'd like to make a comment.
Yes, give me just 1 second. Councilman. Oh, okay, Councilman Good. Go ahead.
No, I just wanted to say that as we kind of massage these last few issues that I think are important, they need to be included in the final version of the DA. But I still think that once that final version has been agreed upon, then we still owe it to the broader community, not just Save the Dells and not just CWAG, but the broader community, to have 30 days to look at the final agreement, be able to be aware of it, ask questions, and that way I think we'll have a much better chance of having the community at large be able to support our final vote and decision.
Councilmember Rusing.
Thank you. It's been a long process, 4.5 years, but I feel that we are coming to a meeting of the minds. In fact, I think we're on the home stretch. There's still some things that we need to iron out, but I think that we're all on board with saving the heart of the Dells. And I'd like to just leave everyone with one thought, and that is after the development agreement is signed and passed, if it does get signed and passed, all it takes is 4 votes of council to undo all the hard work that we've done. So just please think about that, and hopefully that this deal will stand up and we won't be making changes to it. I mean, we expect a few minor amendments, you know, it's a complicated deal, but I just hope that we don't go down that path where we just constantly change it to something that wasn't anything like what we are doing now. Thank you.
I'd like some edification to that comment.
Go ahead.
I don't know. I'm asking the question. Where's the 4 votes that can undo everything we're doing once it's voted in by a council? Do you know?
The development agreement can be amended by 4 votes after it's been passed.
That's a truism, but I would disagree with the statement that there may be some minor amendments to the development agreement as we go forward. This agreement's been negotiated to such great detail that I don't anticipate, and again, it may happen, and there's always the possibility of things happening, but the way this deal has been negotiated so far and continues to be negotiated so far, nobody wants to reopen this can of worms, I guess, you know? So I'm not sure. And let me just say this too, there is a truth to a rezoning takes 4 votes to approve. An amendment to a development agreement takes 4 votes to approve, but it doesn't happen somewhere magical. It happens here in a council chambers
in front of the public,
in front of God and country. So I'm not sure that, it sounds easy in theory, but it takes 4 votes to approve a cell tower site. In theory it takes 4 votes.
A simple majority is all it takes.
But in reality, it takes a public meeting and the public to attend. And so, if there's this sort of concept that this is all going to be undone, I would ask the question, why would we do that? This is a great deal for the city.
Councilman Stishka?
Well, let's hope so.
Councilman Stishka? Yeah, go ahead.
I know that water is a major piece of this whole situation. And in a lot of cases, it was the driver that got us to where we are right now with Michael's aha moment at 3 a.m. But I'd just like to say that as unsightly as density can be, it's very water efficient compared to other forms of density, less density. And I think that what we're looking at is we're looking at new housing developments that are basically growing rocks and very little watering outside. Watering outside is what takes all the water. What's happening inside with the efficient water appliances, what's happening inside is that most of that water, and I'm not going to come up with a percentage because it'll probably be objected to, but most of that water, particularly in these new developments, is going to come back to the city for ultimate recharge.
Mayor Pro Tem?
Thank you, Mayor. I guess I would just like to take a moment to address what Councilmember Rusing said. I see her comments about the majority of council changing the development agreement as a scare tactic. I really do. I can tell you that this council, in my 4 years that I've been on this council, we've been working on this project. In the past year, working on it a lot more than we previously had. While we haven't always agreed, this council has been negotiating in good faith to get the heart of the Dells, to get land around the airport, and to negotiate a deal that we think the citizens of this community can support. And while, yes, there could be changes down the road, don't let that change your opinion of the agreement we have in front of you and the agreement that we will have in front of you with the changes next Tuesday. This is a good deal that has been worked on hard and with intentions that are good for this community from this council. And so I just want to make that clear from my personal standpoint. that this was not designed to be changed or manipulated to be a face for something else. This is the deal that we have in front of you, and the deal is a good one for the city of Prescott.
That's a good comment, and I will second that comment.
Can I third that?
Yes. We can't vote today. It's a study session, but yeah, the fear mongering is in my view unnecessary. We have a good faith agreement in front of us that we believe is good for the city. It's good for us long term. I know the intention here is that we want to conform to the LOI that we all agreed to, and I think we've done that. And now it's really just a matter of memorializing it as best we can so that it can be executed and that we can be faithful to the LOI that we all agreed to. So I think the fear-mongering is totally unnecessary. I want to go back to Howard Mechanic's comment. It was a good comment thanking Mr. Giese, Mr. Swanson, thanking Save the Dells, thanking our public, thanking CWAG, thanking all the groups that have had a lot of input over a lot of months, years. Thank you all for your concerted effort to get to this place. We are close. We're very close. I agree with Mayor Pro Tem on that as well. In terms of a timeline, what I'm thinking about is adjusting what I had set out for a vote, which was on the 24th or the 29th. I'd like to consider moving that back to July 13th, which is 35 days. So we'll hear all of the changes on the 22nd from John. Then I think we should consider on the 24th or the 29th another session to come back and see if there's any other comments around those changes that will be presented on the 22nd. And then because of the July 4th holiday and folks traveling, myself included, I'd like to look at the voting session with public comment on July 13th at this point. With that, I really appreciate the conversation today. I hope it's brought some clarity. I hope it's helped you better understand the development agreement and the intent behind the language in the development agreement. And we will continue to take your comments via email or however you want to deliver those. Happy to hear from you and look forward to seeing you all on the 22nd. We are adjourned.